The heavy oak door shut with a finality that made Eleanor's heart sink. She stood in the center of Judge Halbrook's study, her white wedding dress feeling more like a shroud than bridal finery. The man who was now her husband sat behind his mahogany desk, studying her with eyes as cold as the brass scales of justice that adorned his shelves. "You may retire to your chambers," Halbrook said, his voice measured and distant. "Martha will show you the way." Eleanor's fingers trembled as she gathered her skirts. She was 19, barely more than a girl. And this man, this stranger with gray threading through his beard and lines etched deep around his mouth, was old enough to be her father. The arrangement had been swift, conducted in hushed conversations between her father and the judge over the past month. She'd had no say in the matter. The Halbrook mansion was the finest in Millbridge, a testament to the judge's 20 years of dispensing justice, or what passed for it in these parts. Persian rugs muffled her footsteps as Martha, a severe woman in black, led her through corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced men. The house smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather. Nothing like the sage and sunshine of her father's ranch. "This is your room, Mrs. Halbrook," Martha said, opening a door to reveal a chamber decorated in dark greens and burgundy. A massive four-poster bed dominated the space, its heavy curtains drawn back to reveal crisp white linens. "The judge's room adjoins through that door." Eleanor's breath caught. The connecting door stood like a threat, its brass handle gleaming in the lamplight. "Will there be anything else, ma'am?" Martha's tone suggested there had better not be. "No, thank you." Eleanor's voice came out as barely a whisper. When Martha left, Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bed. Through the tall windows, she could see the town below, the saloon still glowing with light, the general store shuttered for the night, the jail where her husband sent men to hang. Beyond the town, the desert stretched endlessly under a crescent moon. She thought of James, the ranch hand who'd stolen kisses behind the barn last summer. Her father had caught them and sent James away the next day. "You're meant for better things," he'd said. "Judge Halbrook is a powerful man. This marriage will secure our future." But what of her future? What of love? Of choosing her own path? A knock came at the connecting door. Eleanor's pulse quickened. "Come in," she managed. Though every instinct screamed to bolt the door, Judge Halbrook entered, still wearing his black suit from the wedding. In the lamplight, the harsh angles of his face seemed carved from stone. He'd buried his first wife 3 years ago. Consumption, they said, and had shown no interest in remarrying until he'd seen Eleanor at the courthouse last spring. "You're settling in," he observed. Not quite a question. "Yes, sir." The words tasted bitter. He moved closer, and Eleanor caught the scent of whiskey on his breath. "You understand your duties as my wife?" She nodded, though understanding and accepting were different things entirely. "Good." His hand reached out to touch her face, and she flinched. His eyes hardened. "You'll learn not to do that." "I'm sorry, A judge's wife must be above reproach, obedient, devoted." Each word fell like a gavel strike. "Your father assured me you'd been properly raised, but I see there's work to be done." Eleanor's cheeks burned. "I will try to please you, sir. You will do more than try." He grasped her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "This house, this life I'm providing, it comes with expectations. You are mine now, Eleanor. Mine to shape, mine to command. Do you understand?" Terror coiled in her belly. This wasn't the distant courtesy she'd expected from an arranged marriage. This was possession, pure and simple. "I understand," she whispered. He released her and stepped back. "Good. I have documents to review. I'll return within the hour. Be ready." The connecting door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a slam. Eleanor sat frozen for long moments, her mind racing. An hour. She had an hour before her life as she knew it ended forever. Through the window, she could see the stable behind the house, the horses moving restlessly in their stalls. Beyond that, the desert, vast and wild and free. She thought of her mother, dead these 5 years. Sometimes a woman must choose between safety and freedom. She'd whispered on her deathbed, "Choose wisely, my dove." Eleanor stood abruptly and moved to the wardrobe. Her trousseau had been unpacked, fine dresses, delicate nightgowns, all chosen by her father and the judge. She pushed them aside and found what she sought: her old riding clothes. Packed by mistake or sentiment, her fingers worked quickly, shedding the wedding dress like a snake sheds its skin. The riding skirt and blouse felt like coming home. She found her old boots, worn and comfortable, and pulled them on. In the bottom drawer, wrapped in tissue, lay her mother's woolen shawl, the one thing she'd insisted on bringing. From the connecting door came the sound of papers rustling. The judge was still occupied, but not for long. Eleanor gathered what little money she had: a few silver dollars saved from selling eggs, some coins from her father meant for household expenses. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. She wrapped the shawl around her shoulders and crept to the main door. The hallway stretched empty and silent. Martha would be in the servants' quarters by now. The house staff was minimal. The judge preferred his privacy. Eleanor's boots made no sound on the thick carpets as she descended the main staircase. The front door would be locked and too visible from the study. But the kitchen door, leading to the garden and then the stables. The kitchen was dark, smelling of the evening's roast and fresh bread. Eleanor's stomach clenched. When had she last eaten? The wedding breakfast seemed a lifetime ago. She grabbed a heel of bread and some dried meat from the pantry, stuffing them into her pockets. The door opened silently onto the moonlit garden. Eleanor paused, listening. No alarm, no shouts, just the distant howl of a coyote and the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. She kept to the shadows, her heart pounding so loud she was certain it would wake the house. The stable door was latched but not locked. Inside, the horses nickered softly, recognizing a friend. Eleanor ran her hand along the stalls. The judge's stallion was too distinctive, would be missed too quickly. But there, a sturdy mare, brown and unremarkable. Perfect. She was saddling the horse when she heard it. The sound of the connecting door slamming open 2 floors above. A bellow of rage that made the horses stamp nervously. No time for a full saddle. Eleanor grabbed a bridle and swung onto the mare's back, her split skirt allowing her to ride astride. She urged the horse out of the stable and into the night, leaning low over its neck as shouts erupted from the house. The streets of Millbridge were empty at this hour, but not for long. Eleanor guided the mare between buildings, taking the alleys she'd memorized during her few visits to town. Behind her, she could hear doors opening, voices calling out. At the edge of town, she had a choice: the main road east, back toward her father's ranch, or the rough trail west, into the wilderness. East meant capture, meant being returned like a piece of lost property. West meant the unknown, but also freedom. Eleanor turned the mare west and kicked her into a gallop. The desert night swallowed them whole. Sage and mesquite blurred past as the mare found her stride. Eleanor's hair came loose from its pins, streaming behind her like a banner of defiance. The shawl fluttered and danced, but she held tight to both it and the reins. Miles fell away. The lights of Millbridge faded to a dim glow, then disappeared entirely. Only then did Eleanor slow the mare to a walk, both of them breathing hard. She had no map, no compass, only the stars and a desperate need to be anywhere but where she'd been. The moon traced its path across the sky as she rode, following deer trails and dry washes. When the mare began to stumble with exhaustion, Eleanor finally stopped beside a cluster of juniper trees. She slid from the horse's back, her legs nearly giving way. Reality crashed over her like a flash flood. She was alone in the wilderness with little money, less food, and no clear destination. Behind her, a powerful man would already be organizing search parties. Her father would be furious. She would be branded a disgrace, a runaway wife, damaged goods. But as Eleanor looked up at the vast canopy of stars, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Whatever came next, whatever dangers waited in the desert darkness, she had chosen them. For the first time in her life, The path ahead was hers to determine. She tethered the mare to a juniper branch and wrapped herself in her mother's shawl. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, she was free. The coyotes sang their wild songs in the distance as Eleanor dozed fitfully against a smooth boulder, the stolen mare standing guard beside her. She didn't know that by noon the next day, dehydrated and lost, she would collapse at the edge of nowhere. She didn't know that her fate would soon intertwine with that of a man who lived outside the law, a horse thief with gentle hands and haunted eyes. All she knew was that she had escaped, and that was enough, for now. The sun bore down mercilessly on the alkali flat, turning the world into a shimmering mirage. Caleb Winters pulled his hat lower and studied the figure sprawled beside a dying juniper tree. At first, he'd thought it was a trick of the heat. Folks saw all manner of things that weren't there in this godforsaken stretch of desert. But the brown mare tethered nearby was real enough, her head hanging low with exhaustion. He approached cautiously, one hand on the colt at his hip. Could be a trap. The law had creative ways of trying to catch a man with a price on his head. But as he drew closer, he saw it was a woman, young from the look of her, dressed in riding clothes that had seen better days. Her face was burned red by the sun, lips cracked and bleeding. "Miss?" He kept his distance, scanning the horizon for signs of ambush. Nothing but creosote and tumbleweeds as far as the eye could see. No response. The woman didn't stir. Caleb dismounted his paint horse and crept closer. The mare whickered weakly, too tired to be spooked by a stranger. He could see now that the woman was breathing, shallow and quick like a wounded rabbit. No weapons visible, no badge, no trap. Just a girl who'd gotten herself in trouble in the worst possible place. He should leave her. That was the smart play. Someone would come looking, and Caleb couldn't afford to be found. 3 years of running had taught him that survival meant staying alone, staying hidden, staying hard. But something about her reminded him of Sarah, his sister. Same dark hair, same delicate build. Sarah, who'd died at 17 because a judge decided her medicine man grandfather was practicing witchcraft and had him hanged, leaving her without the herbs that kept her lung sickness at bay. Cursing his own foolishness. Caleb fetched his water skin from his saddlebags. He knelt beside the woman and lifted her head carefully, trickling water between her cracked lips. She stirred, coughing weakly. "Easy now," he murmured. "Just a bit at a time." Her eyes fluttered open, green as spring grass, wild with fever and fear. She jerked away from him, scrambling backward until she hit the juniper trunk. "Stay back!" Her voice was a hoarse croak. Caleb held up his hands, the water skin dangling harmlessly. "I ain't gonna hurt you, miss, just trying to help." She watched him with those green eyes, taking in his trail-worn clothes, the gun at his hip, the weathered face that marked him as a man who lived rough. "Who are you?" "Nobody important." He set the water skin on the ground between them and backed away. "Drink slow or you'll sick it back up." She grabbed the skin like a lifeline, but heeded his advice, taking small sips. While she drank, Caleb studied her more closely. Quality clothes beneath the trail dust, soft hands that hadn't known much hard work, a gold wedding band on her finger that she kept twisting nervously. A runaway wife. Then, he'd seen it before. Women fleeing bad situations, heading for California or Oregon territory. Most of them unprepared for the harsh reality of the desert. This one had lasted longer than most, judging by the sun damage and the hollow look of near starvation. "How long you been out here?" he asked. 2 days, I think." She looked at the position of the sun, confused. "Maybe 3. Where you headed?" Her laugh was bitter. "Away, just away." Caleb nodded. He understood that destination well enough. "Well, you won't make it far on a way without supplies. That mare's about done, and you're not much better." "I'll manage." "Sure you will. Right up until you don't." He moved to his horse and pulled out some jerky and hardtack. Nothing fancy, but it would keep body and soul together. He set it beside the water skin. "There's a trading post about 15 miles northwest, Murphy's Station. They won't ask questions if you've got coin. Why are you helping me? Suspicion sharpened her voice. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm just leaving supplies for the coyotes. He swung back onto his paint. Either way, makes no difference to me. He'd ridden maybe 50 yards when he heard her call out. Wait! Against his better judgment. He reined in and looked back. She was standing now, swaying slightly, the wedding ring glinting in the harsh light. I don't know which way is northwest. Caleb sighed. Every instinct told him to keep riding. The woman was trouble. That much was clear as desert sky. But Sarah's face kept swimming in his memory. How she'd looked that last day when he'd found her collapsed by the well. Too weak to draw water. He turned his horse and rode back. You got any idea what you're doing out here? No. The admission seemed to cost her. But I couldn't stay where I was. Bad husband? She flinched. Something like that. Caleb studied the horizon, calculating. He was heading for the mountains anyway, planning to lay low until the heat died down from that incident in Tucson. The trading post was on his route, more or less. And if someone was following her, better to know about it than be surprised. I'm going toward Murphy's station, he said finally. You can ride along if you keep up and don't ask questions. You fall behind, I leave you. You bring trouble, I leave you. Understood. Hope flickered in those green eyes. Understood. Can you ride? Yes. He watched her struggle onto the mare's back, noting how she sat the horse despite her weakness. Whoever she was, she'd been trained to ride properly. Quality. Then, not just quality clothes, they set off at a walk, the pace painful but necessary given the condition of both woman and mare. Caleb kept his eyes on the horizon, watching for dust plumes that might signal pursuit. The woman rode in silence, which he appreciated. Too many people felt the need to fill the desert quiet with chatter. The sun tracked across the sky, brutal and uncaring. Caleb called a halt in the shade of some tall rocks, letting the horses rest. The woman slid from her saddle and found her own shade, still maintaining that wary distance. What's your name? She asked finally. Told you, no questions. That's not fair. You know I'm running from a husband. I know you're wearing a wedding ring and heading nowhere fast. The rest is your business. She twisted the ring again, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as nervous habit. It's Eleanor. My name is Eleanor. He didn't respond, didn't offer his own name. Names were dangerous things in his line of work. Are you an outlaw? She pressed. What did I say about questions? I just want to know if I'm safe with you. That made him laugh, short and sharp. Lady, you're in the middle of the desert with no supplies and no idea where you're going. You're about as far from safe as a person can get. Whether I'm an outlaw or a saint makes no difference to that. She fell silent again, but he could feel her watching him, evaluating. He'd seen that look before, usually right before someone decided whether to turn him in for the bounty. They reached Murphy's station as the sun was setting, painting the ramshackle buildings in shades of gold and red. The trading post was barely more than a few adobe structures clustered around a well, but to desert travelers, it was civilization. Wait here, Caleb told her. Stopping behind some rocks outside the settlement, I'll check if it's clear. Clear of what? But he was already moving, approaching the buildings with the careful gait of a hunted man. The post looked quiet, just Murphy's old burro in the corral and a couple of horses he didn't recognize. Could be traders. Could be trouble. He circled wide, coming up to the back window where he could peer inside. Murphy was there, dealing cards to two men Caleb didn't know. Drifters, by the look of them. Not law. He made his way back to Eleanor. Look safe enough. You got money? She nodded, patting a small purse at her waist. Good. Buy what you need. Food, water, grain for the horse. Don't mention you've been traveling with anyone. Don't mention where you're headed. Aren't you coming in? I'll water my horse and move on. Best we part ways here. Something like panic flashed across her face. But I still don't know where to go. Murphy can point you toward California, or back home, if you've changed your mind. I haven't. The words came out fierce. "I'll never go back." He believed her. There was steel under that sunburned exterior, the kind that got forged in desperation. "Then go forward," he said. "That's all any of us can do." He led his paint to the well, keeping to the shadows. Eleanor dismounted and walked toward the trading post, her steps steadier now with water and food in her belly. At the door, she paused and looked back at him. "Thank you," she called softly. Caleb touched his hat brim and turned away. He'd done what he could. The woman would make her own way now. Or she wouldn't. Either way, it was no longer his concern. He was filling his water skins when he heard the voices from inside the post get louder. Through the window, he could see Eleanor at the counter, Murphy shaking his head. The two drifters had stood up, their interest clearly piqued by the presence of a woman alone. Caleb cursed under his breath. He should ride out now, while he could. Whatever happened next wasn't his problem, but he found himself lingering by the well, watching as Eleanor left the post with a pitifully small bundle of supplies. The two men followed her out, keeping a casual distance that didn't fool anyone who knew how predators moved. Eleanor walked to her mare, her back straight but her hands shaking as she tied the supplies to her saddle. The men approached, all friendly smiles and offers of help. "Leave me be," Eleanor said, her voice carrying clearly in the still evening air. "Now that's not neighborly." One of the men said, "Pretty lady like you shouldn't be traveling alone. All kinds of dangers out here." Caleb was moving before he'd made the conscious decision to intervene. Old habits, maybe, or maybe just stupidity. "Evening, gentlemen," he said, stepping out of the shadows. His hand rested casual-like on his gun butt. "Something I can help you with?" The two men sized him up, taking in the worn gun leather, the easy stance of someone comfortable with violence. "Just being friendly to the lady," one said. "She doesn't seem to want your friendship." "Don't recall asking your opinion. Stranger?" Caleb smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "No, I don't suppose you did, but here it is anyway. The lady's traveling under my protection. That makes her my concern." Eleanor's eyes widened, but she had the sense to keep quiet. The men exchanged glances, weighing odds, 2 against 1. But something about Caleb's stillness gave them pause. "Didn't know she was spoken for," the talkative one said finally. "No offense meant. None taken. Evening to you." They backed away, hands carefully visible, and headed for their horses. Caleb waited until they'd ridden off before turning to Eleanor. "Thought I told you we were parting ways? I didn't ask for your help." "No, but you needed it just the same." He looked at her meager supplies. "Murphy wouldn't extend credit?" She shook her head, embarrassed. "He wanted more money than I had." Caleb sighed. The smart thing was still to leave her here, but those two drifters would circle back once he was gone. Sure as sunrise. And Murphy would probably sell her out to whoever came looking. The old trader had flexible loyalties where coin was concerned. "You know anything about making camp? Building a fire? Finding water?" "I can learn. Learning takes time. Time gets you killed out here." He made a decision he knew he'd regret. 3 days. I'll take you as far as the San Pedro River. After that, you're on your own." Relief washed over her features. "I won't slow you down. You already have, and stop twisting that ring. Might as well wear a sign saying, 'Runaway Wife.'" She looked down at the gold band as if seeing it for the first time. With sudden decision, she yanked it off and flung it into the desert darkness. There, not a wife anymore. Caleb shook his head. If only it were that easy to leave the past behind. But he kept that thought to himself as they mounted up and rode into the gathering night. Two fugitives bound together by necessity and the unforgiving laws of the desert. Behind them, Murphy's station faded into the darkness. Ahead lay 3 days that would change everything, though neither of them knew it yet. The desert had moods. Caleb knew, and today its mood was murderous. The wind came in hot gusts that scoured exposed skin with sand and salt. Eleanor rode hunched in her saddle, the wool shawl wrapped around her face, leaving only her eyes visible. They'd been traveling for 2 days now, and the initial relief of companionship had given way to the grinding reality of survival. There, Caleb pointed to a line of darker vegetation ahead. Cottonwoods mean water. Eleanor nodded, too exhausted to speak. They'd been rationing water since dawn, and her lips were cracked despite the salve he'd shared from his pack. She was tougher than he'd expected. Hadn't complained once, even when they'd had to detour around a flash flood that turned a dry wash into a raging torrent. They made camp in the shade of the cottonwoods, beside a spring that bubbled up from the rocks. Eleanor slid from her mare and immediately knelt by the water. But Caleb caught her shoulder. "Slow," he reminded her. "Let your horse drink first. She's carried you this far." Eleanor flushed but moved aside, watching as both horses drank their fill. Only then did she cup water in her hands, sipping carefully. Caleb filled the water skins and checked their supplies. The jerky was nearly gone, and they'd need to hunt soon or detour to another settlement. "How do you know all this?" Eleanor asked, settling against a boulder. "About the desert. I mean, spent 3 years learning it the hard way." He pulled out his knife and began whittling a branch into kindling for their evening fire. "Desert teaches quick. You either learn or you die. Were you always what you are now?" He glanced at her. "Thought we agreed on no questions. We've been riding together for 2 days. I don't even know your name." Names are dangerous, but something in her expression, a loneliness that echoed his own, made him relent slightly. "I trained horses, army mounts, mostly. Fort Huachuca, down near the border." "What happened?" The knife stilled in his hands. "Colonel's prize stallion went missing. Valuable animal. Brought all the way from Virginia. They found it in my corral, though I'd never laid eyes on it before that morning. Colonel didn't wait for explanations. Just declared me a thief and set the law on me." "But if you were innocent don't matter when the man making the accusation has gold braid on his shoulders and you're just a half-breed horse trainer." The words came out bitter. He hadn't meant to reveal that much. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "My husband is a judge," she said softly. "Judge Halbrook. Back in Millbridge, he sends men to hang for stealing chickens, but lets murderers walk free if they have the right friends. The law, it's just another word for power, isn't it?" "Now you're learning." Caleb went back to his whittling. "What made you run?" She pulled her knees to her chest, looking younger than her years. "He wanted to own me, like I was a horse to be broken, trained to his hand. My father owed him money, favors. I was the payment." "How old are you?" 19. He's 46. She shuddered. "On our wedding night, he told me I would learn obedience, that he would shape me into the perfect wife, the way he looked at me." She trailed off. Caleb felt an old anger stir. Men like that. Men who used their position to take what they wanted. He'd known too many of them. "You have people somewhere? Family who'd take you in?" "A sister in Kansas. Mary. She married a wheat farmer last year, but I don't know if they'd have me. A woman who runs from her husband." She shrugged. "I'm ruined now." "Ruined is letting yourself be owned. You did what you had to do." She looked at him with those green eyes, and he saw gratitude there that made him uncomfortable. He stood abruptly, gathering his rifle. "I'm going to scout for game. Stay here. Keep the fire low. If anyone comes, hide and stay quiet. I remember." He found her still by the fire when he returned an hour later with 2 rabbits. She'd gathered more wood and refilled the water skins without being asked. Practical. He liked that about her. They ate in companionable silence as stars emerged in the darkening sky. The desert night sound started up, coyotes in the distance, the rustle of small creatures in the brush. Eleanor pulled her shawl tighter. "Does it scare you?" she asked. "Being hunted?" "Used to. Now it's just how things are." He fed another stick to the fire. "Fear's useful if it keeps you sharp, but you can't let it rule you. I was terrified that whole first night. Kept thinking I'd made a terrible mistake." "Did you?" She considered this. "No. Even if I die out here, at least I'll die free." "That's a dark thought for a young woman." "Is it?" She met his gaze across the fire. "You risk death every day rather than submit to false justice." How is what I'm doing different? He had no answer for that. In the firelight, she looked fierce despite her sunburned face and trail-worn clothes, like a wild thing that refused to be tamed. It stirred something in him he'd thought long dead. "We should sleep," he said gruffly. "Long day tomorrow." He spread his bedroll on one side of the fire, she on the other, but sleep was elusive. He found himself listening to her breathing, the small sounds she made settling into rest. When had another person's presence last brought him comfort instead of danger? Near midnight, Eleanor gasped awake from some dream. He could see her silhouette, sitting up, trembling. "Just a dream," he said quietly. "You're safe." He was there, in the dream, said I belonged to him, that he'd find me wherever I ran. Men like that want you to believe they're all-powerful, but they bleed same as anyone else. She was quiet for a moment. "Would you teach me?" "Teach you what?" "To shoot, to defend myself, to be like you." "You don't want to be like me. I've got nothing but a horse and the clothes on my back. No home, no family, no future beyond the next sunrise. You have freedom. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose." She lay back down, but he could tell she wasn't sleeping. After a while, she spoke again. So soft, he almost missed it. "My name is Eleanor Whitman. I was Eleanor Whitman before I was Eleanor Halbrook, and I choose to be her again." It was a gift, that trust, her real name, her past, offered freely when he'd given her so little of himself. He cleared his throat. "Caleb. My name is Caleb Winters." He heard her soft intake of breath. "Caleb Winters, the horse thief. So they say. I don't believe them." "Why not?" "Because a real thief wouldn't have shared his water with a stranger, wouldn't have risked himself to help me at Murphy's station." She paused. "And because I've learned that the law lies as easy as breathing." They fell silent again, but something had shifted between them. A recognition, perhaps. Two souls outside the boundaries of acceptable society, finding kinship in their exile. The next day brought new challenges. The terrain grew rougher, forcing them to lead the horses through narrow canyons where flash floods had carved deep channels in the rock. Eleanor kept up without complaint, though he could see the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders. They were navigating a particularly treacherous stretch when Caleb heard it, the distinctive echo of horses in the canyon behind them. He held up a hand, and Eleanor froze. "How many?" she whispered. He listened carefully. "3, maybe 4, moving fast." Her face paled. "Do you think? Could be anyone, but we can't take chances." He scanned the canyon walls. "There, see that split in the rock? Leads to higher ground. We can watch from there, see who's following." They scrambled up the narrow passage, pulling the reluctant horses behind them. From their vantage point, hidden behind a cluster of boulders, they could see the canyon floor below. The riders appeared minutes later, 4 men in the worn clothes of bounty hunters, rifles across their saddles. Caleb recognized one of them, Jake Morrison, a man who'd track his own mother for the right price. "They after you or me?" Eleanor breathed. "Me, most likely. Morrison's been dogging my trail for months." He watched them pass below, noting their supplies, their weapons. "But they'd be happy to collect on both of us. I imagine your husband put out a reward?" "Probably. He doesn't like losing his possessions." They waited until the hunters were well past before descending, but now they'd have to be more careful, take less direct routes. The 3-day journey to the San Pedro would stretch longer. That night, they made cold camp, no fire to draw attention. They sat close together for warmth, sharing the last of the rabbits and speaking in whispers. "I'm slowing you down." Eleanor said, "You could move faster alone, hide better." "Probably." "Then why don't you leave me?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Had a sister once, Sarah. Lung sickness took her. But before that, she was wild like you, always talking about seeing the ocean, riding free, living her own life." He paused. She never got the chance. Eleanor's hand found his in the darkness. Just for a moment, a brief squeeze of understanding. But that simple touch sent warmth through him that had nothing to do with the shared body heat. "I'm not her," Eleanor said softly. "You can't save her by saving me." "I know that." He turned his hand, letting their fingers intertwine. "Maybe I'm not saving you. Maybe you're saving me." She leaned against his shoulder, and he let her. In the morning, they'd resume their flight, chase the horizon toward an uncertain future. But for now, in this moment, two fugitives found solace in each other's company under the vast canopy of desert stars. The boundary between necessity and choice was beginning to blur, like distant mountains in the heat shimmer. What had started as reluctant aid was becoming something else, something neither of them had words for yet. In the darkness, a coyote called to its mate. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, lonely and wild and free. The mountain path narrowed to barely a ledge, with sheer rock on one side and a dizzying drop on the other. They'd been climbing since dawn, driven higher by the knowledge that Morrison's men were somewhere below. Snow patches appeared between the pines, though it was late spring in the valleys. "Easy now," Caleb murmured to his paint, who snorted nervously at the crumbling edge. Behind him, Eleanor guided her mare with steady hands, though her knuckles were white on the reins. The accident happened fast. Eleanor's mare stepped on loose shale that gave way without warning. The horse screamed, scrambling for purchase as the ground disappeared beneath its hooves. Eleanor lunged from the saddle, reaching desperately for solid rock, but momentum carried her over the edge. "Eleanor!" Caleb moved without thinking, diving forward and catching her wrist just as she went over. The impact nearly pulled him after her, but he wedged his boots against a boulder and held on. She dangled above a 100-foot drop, her green eyes wide with terror but no scream escaping her lips. Below, her mare's body lay broken on the rocks. "I've got you," he gritted out, though his grip was slipping. "Reach up with your other hand." She did, and he caught that wrist too, slowly hauling her up until she could grab the ledge herself. They collapsed together on the narrow path, breathing hard. Eleanor was trembling. Whether from cold or shock, he couldn't tell. "My horse," she began. "Gone. I'm sorry." She nodded, swallowing hard. They'd lost not just transportation, but supplies still tied to the mare's saddle. Caleb pulled her to her feet, noting how she favored her left ankle. "Can you walk?" "I'll have to." But when she tried to put weight on it, she gasped in pain. Caleb knelt and gently probed the ankle through her boot. "Not broken, but twisted bad. We need shelter." He spotted what he was looking for an hour later, a shadow in the cliff face that might be a cave. Getting there required traversing a treacherous slope of loose rock and ice. He tied Eleanor to him with rope from his saddlebags. "If I fall, cut yourself loose," he instructed. "No, Eleanor, we go together or not at all." He didn't argue further. They made their way across, Eleanor hopping on one foot, leaning heavily on him. The shadow proved to be a cave, shallow but dry, protected from the wind. Caleb settled Eleanor inside and went back for his horse, leading the paint to a small grove where he could graze on pine needles and patches of grass. By the time he returned, Eleanor had gotten her boot off, revealing an ankle already purple and swollen. She looked up at him, trying to smile through obvious pain. "Well, you wanted to leave me somewhere. Looks like you got your wish. This isn't what I had in mind." He knelt beside her, tearing strips from his spare shirt to bind the ankle. His hands were gentle despite their calluses. "Caleb," her voice was soft, "you could still go. Morrison wants you, not me. Stop talking foolish." He finished the binding and sat back. "We'll wait out the night here, see how it looks come morning." But as the sun set and the temperature plummeted, they faced a new problem. The cave offered shelter from wind, but not from the mountain cold. Their single blanket and Eleanor's wool shawl weren't enough. Caleb built a small fire near the entrance, but it barely touched the chill. Eleanor sat huddled against the cave wall, shivering despite her efforts to hide it. Her lips were taking on a bluish tinge that worried him. Pride and propriety seemed foolish concerns when faced with the real danger of freezing. "Come here," he said gruffly, opening his arms. She looked at him, understanding clear in her eyes. "Caleb, body heat's all we've got, unless you prefer frostbite." She moved carefully, mindful of her ankle, until she was settled against his chest. He wrapped the blanket around them both, her shawl over that. She was cold as mountain snow, shivering so hard he could hear her teeth chatter. "Better?" he asked after a few minutes. "Yes." Her voice was small. "Thank you." They sat in silence, watching the fire flicker. Gradually, Eleanor's shivering subsided. Warmth built between them, different from the simple sharing of heat. Caleb became acutely aware of every point of contact, her head on his shoulder, her hand resting over his heart, the way she fit against him like she belonged there. "Tell me about the ocean," Eleanor said suddenly. "You said Sarah wanted to see it. Never seen it myself, but there was a man at the fort, came from San Francisco. He'd talk about water stretching to the horizon, waves tall as houses, air that tasted of salt." He paused, remembering. Sarah would listen for hours, planning the trip we'd take someday. What else did she plan? The question unlocked memories he usually kept buried. He found himself talking about his sister, her laugh, her stubborn streak, the way she'd defend him against anyone who called him names for his mixed blood. Eleanor listened without interrupting, her presence a comfort he hadn't expected. "She sounds wonderful," Eleanor said when he fell silent. "She would be proud of you. For becoming an outlaw? For surviving? For being kind when the world gave you every reason not to be?" She shifted to look up at him. "For saving a stranger when it would have been easier to ride on." Their faces were close, her breath warm on his cheek. The firelight caught gold flecks in her green eyes. Something shifted in the air between them, heavy with possibility. "Eleanor," he said, a warning or plea. He wasn't sure which. She raised her hand to his face, fingertips tracing the line of his jaw. "I've spent my whole life being told what I can't do, can't want, can't choose. Out here, with you, I finally feel alive." He caught her hand, meaning to pull it away, but found himself pressing it to his cheek instead. "You don't know what you're saying. The cold, the fear." "Don't!" Her voice was fierce. "Don't tell me what I feel. I may be young, but I know my own mind. I know that when you touch me, I don't feel owned. I feel seen." The last of his resistance crumbled. He lowered his head, giving her time to pull away. Instead, she met him halfway. The kiss was tentative at first, careful. Then Eleanor made a soft sound and pressed closer, and careful became something else entirely. Heat bloomed between them that had nothing to do with survival. His hands tangled in her hair, pins scattering across the cave floor. She clutched his shoulders like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, reality crashed back. Caleb pulled away, though it took everything he had. "We can't," he said roughly. "You're hurt, exhausted, not thinking clear." "I'm thinking clearer than I ever have." But she didn't pursue it, settling back against his chest. "Just hold me, please. Let me pretend, just for tonight, that we're not running, that we're just two people who chose each other." He wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the scent of her hair, sage and dust and something uniquely Eleanor. Outside, wind howled through the pines. The fire burned lower, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. "I've never kissed anyone because I wanted to," Eleanor confessed quietly. "James, the ranch hand, he kissed me, but it was quick, stolen, and my husband." She shuddered. "That wasn't kissing, that was claiming." Caleb's arms tightened around her. "You deserve better than stolen moments in a cave." "Do I? A ruined woman with no reputation? No family who'll claim me?" She laughed, but it was sad. "Maybe stolen moments are all either of us get." "Don't say that." "Why not? It's true. We're both outside the law now. Caleb, both broken by it." She turned in his arms to face him again. But maybe broken things can choose each other. Maybe that's enough. This time, when she kissed him, he didn't pull away. The blanket pooled around them as they explored this new territory between them. Hands and mouths learning the language of desire. Eleanor's breath hitched when he kissed the hollow of her throat. His control nearly shattered when she whispered his name like a prayer. But when her trembling fingers went to the buttons of her blouse, he caught her hands. "Not like this," he said, though the words cost him. "Not because we're cold and scared and might die tomorrow. When we... He struggled to find the right words. "Oh, you deserve better than desperation?" Eleanor studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "You're right. But Caleb, this isn't desperation. This is the first real choice I've ever made about my own body, my own heart." They settled back into each other's arms. The moment passed, but the connection remained. Eleanor dozed fitfully, murmuring occasionally in her sleep. Caleb stayed awake, keeping watch, adding small sticks to the fire when it burned low. Near dawn, she stirred. "Are you sorry?" she asked softly. "About what happened?" "No." The admission came easier than expected. "Are you? The only thing I'm sorry about is that we stopped." She said it matter-of-factly, without coyness. "But you were right. I want it to be because we can, not because we must." The honesty between them was its own intimacy. As gray light filtered into the cave, Caleb found himself imagining impossible things. A future where they weren't running. A small ranch somewhere nobody knew their names. Waking up beside her because he wanted to, not because they'd freeze otherwise. Dangerous thoughts for a wanted man. But as Eleanor stretched against him, wincing at her sore ankle, he allowed himself the fantasy a moment longer. Outside, the storm had passed. Soon they'd have to move. Stay ahead of Morrison. Find new supplies. The real world with all its harsh edges waited. But for now, in this cave above the world, two outlaws held each other and pretended that broken things could indeed be whole. Eleanor tested her weight on the injured ankle, gritting her teeth against the pain. 3 days in the cave had helped, but she still couldn't walk far without support. Caleb watched her with worried eyes, though he tried to hide it. "We need supplies," he said for the 3rd time that morning. "The jerky's gone, and we're down to melted snow for water." "Then go get them." She tried to sound practical, not terrified at the thought of him leaving. "There's a settlement you mentioned, Cutter's Creek. I'll be fine here." "Like hell you will." The vehemence in his voice surprised them both. He ran a hand through his dark hair, leaving it standing in unruly spikes. "Morrison's men could circle back. Mountain cats hunt these ridges. And that ankle—" "Caleb." She caught his hand, stilling his agitation. "We both know you can move faster alone. Take your horse, get what we need, come back. I have the rifle." "You ever shot a rifle?" "No, but I'm a quick learner." He taught her that morning, showing her how to load, aim, breathe. Her first shots went wild, but by the 10th, she was hitting the pine cone he'd set as a target. The rifle's kick bruised her shoulder, but she didn't complain. "Anyone comes, you stay hidden," he instructed, checking his saddlebags. "Don't try to be brave, just hide and wait for me." "How long?" "Day and a half, maybe 2. He paused at the cave entrance, looking back, since that night of shared warmth. They'd been careful with each other. No more kisses, no more whispered confessions. But the awareness hummed between them like a struck tuning fork. "Caleb?" She stood, balancing on her good foot. "Be careful." He crossed to her in 2 strides, cupping her face in his calloused hands. "I'm coming back, Eleanor. That's a promise." The kiss was brief but thorough, leaving her breathless. Then he was gone, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the mountain silence. Eleanor spent the first day organizing their meager camp and practicing with the rifle until her shoulders screamed protest. The second day, anxiety crept in with the mountain fog. She rationed the last strips of jerky, melted snow in the coffee pot, and tried not to imagine all the ways a lone rider could meet death between here and Cutter's Creek. On the morning of the third day, she heard horses, multiple horses, moving slow and careful up the mountain path. Not Caleb. He'd returned the way he left, and alone. Eleanor grabbed the rifle and pressed herself into the deepest shadow of the cave, heart hammering. The voices reached her before the riders came into view. Tracks lead up here somewhere, man and woman, just like the judge said. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. Judge Halbrook had found her. Waste of time if you ask me. Another voice grumbled. That snowstorm 3 nights back would have wiped any tracks. You want to tell Judge Halbrook we gave up? Man's paying $500 for his wife's return. $500 more if we bring back the half-breed who took her. Eleanor bit her lip to keep from making a sound. They thought Caleb had kidnapped her. Of course, a man like her husband couldn't conceive that a woman might choose to leave, might prefer an outlaw's company to his own. The horses came into view. 4 men, all armed, wearing the kind of clothes that marked them as trackers for hire. Not Morrison's bunch, then, but her husband's men. They stopped almost directly below the cave. Check that ridge, the leader ordered. Caves up there'd make good shelter. Eleanor held her breath, rifle ready. But she remembered Caleb's words. Don't try to be brave. 4 men against an injured woman who'd just learned to shoot. Those weren't odds worth testing. The tracker climbed toward the cave, spurs jingling with each step. Eleanor retreated deeper into the shadows. Finger on the trigger. 20 feet, 15, 10. A shot cracked through the morning air, echoing off the peaks. The tracker stumbled, clutching his shoulder, and tumbled back down the slope. More shots followed, a rifle speaking from the tree line. Ambush, someone shouted. Take cover. Eleanor peered out to see chaos below. The trackers scattered, firing wildly at the trees. Another went down, holding his leg. But the hidden shooter kept the advantage, picking them off with careful precision. She knew that rifle's voice. Caleb, he'd come back. One tracker broke cover, spurring his horse down the mountain path. He made it 30 yards before his horse screamed and went down, a red bloom spreading on its flank. The man rolled clear, limping into the brush. Who's out there? The leader called, crouched behind a boulder. We got no quarrel with you, friend, just looking for a runaway wife. There's money in it if you've seen her. The only thing you'll find up here is a shallow grave. Caleb's voice carried clear and cold. Ride on while you can. Now hold on. The leader's words cut off as a bullet sparked off the rock inches from his head. All right, we're going. The wounded were helped onto horses. They retreated down the mountain, considerably less cocky than they'd arrived. Eleanor waited until the hoofbeats faded before emerging from the cave. Caleb! He materialized from the trees, rifle still ready, scanning for threats. Only when satisfied they were alone did he lower the weapon and really look at her. You're all right? His voice was rough. They didn't. I'm fine. You came back. Said I would. They stood 20 feet apart, the morning sun slanting between them. Then Eleanor was limping toward him, and he was running to meet her, catching her up in an embrace that lifted her off her feet. Thought I'd lost you, he muttered into her hair. Saw their tracks joining the trail. Knew they were ahead of me. Rode all night. I'm here. I'm safe. You saved me. She pulled back to look at him, seeing the exhaustion, the fear he'd carried. But Caleb, they'll be back, with more men. I know. He set her down carefully, mindful of her ankle. We can't stay here, but Eleanor, there's something else. In town, I heard talk. Your husband, he's put out word that I kidnapped you. Says I'm forcing you to write ransom notes. He's got the federal marshals involved now. The implications hit her like a physical blow. Bad enough to be hunted by bounty men and local trackers. But federal marshals had resources, jurisdiction, relentlessness. Then we'll tell them the truth, she said. I'll write to the marshals. Explain. The word of a horse thief and a hysterical woman against a respected judge. Caleb shook his head. How do you think that story ends? Eleanor felt rage rise in her throat, hot and choking. even here, hundreds of miles from Millbridge. Her husband's power reached out to twist the truth, to make her the victim she'd refused to be. Then what do we do? Caleb was quiet for a moment, staring at the trail the trackers had taken. There's a place, he said finally. Man I knew at Fort Huachuca talked about it. A monastery up in the Sangre de Cristos. San Miguel, I think he called it. They take in people who need sanctuary. Don't ask questions. It's maybe a week's ride from here. A monastery. Eleanor tried to picture it. Would they take a woman? They take anyone who comes in peace. It's been their way for 200 years, since the Spanish built it. He met her eyes. You'd be safe there. Could write to your sister. Make proper arrangements. Start over with a clean slate. And you? His silence was answer enough. No. The word came out sharp. We go together or not at all. That's what we said. That was before federal marshals got involved. Eleanor, they catch you with me. You're an accomplice. They catch you alone at San Miguel. You're a victim who escaped her captor. I don't want to be a victim. I won't play that role, not even to save myself. She gripped his arms, willing him to understand. Don't you see? That's what he wants, to define me, to write my story for me, if I let him. If I agree to be the stolen woman instead of the one who chose to run, then he wins. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You're sure? Because once we ride out together, knowing what they're saying, there's no going back. You'll be as wanted as I am. Then we'll be wanted together. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, like a man drowning in the truth of what they were choosing. When they broke apart, his eyes held a new resolve. All right, we go to San Miguel together, but first, he moved to his horse, pulling supplies from the saddlebags. I brought food, ammunition, grain for the horses, and this. He held up a bottle of horse liniment. For your ankle. Man at the store swears by it. Eleanor laughed, surprising herself. You brought me horse medicine. Works on people, too, probably. He grinned, and for a moment looked younger, like the man he might have been in a different life. Also brought this, a simple silver chain with a small compass pendant. Nothing fancy, the kind of thing sold at trading posts to travelers. But Eleanor's throat tightened as he fastened it around her neck. So you can always find your way, he said softly, no matter what happens. They packed quickly, Eleanor insisting she could ride despite her ankle. Caleb's paint horse would have to carry them both, not ideal, but possible. They rigged a makeshift stirrup to support her injured foot and set off as the sun climbed toward noon. Behind them, the cave stood empty, holding only the ashes of their fire and the memory of choices made. Ahead lay the long road to sanctuary, with all its dangers and uncertainties. But as Eleanor settled against Caleb's back, feeling the steady beat of his heart, she knew she'd rather face those dangers with him than all the safety in the world alone. The compass swung gently against her chest, pointing north, pointing forward, pointing to whatever future they could carve from the unforgiving stone of the world's judgment. The monastery of San Miguel rose from the mountain like something grown rather than built, its adobe walls the same red gold as the surrounding cliffs. After a week of hard travel, dodging settlements and keeping to deer trails, the sight of it made Eleanor's eyes blur with tears. There it is, Caleb said quietly. Sanctuary. They'd acquired a second horse 3 days back, bought from a homesteader with the last of their money and Eleanor's mother's pearl hairpin. She rode beside him now, her ankle healed enough to bear weight, though it still ached by evening. The bells were ringing vespers as they approached the heavy wooden gates. An elderly monk emerged from a small side door, his brown robes dusty at the hem. He took in their travel-worn appearance, the way they sat their horses like people ready to flee, and simply nodded. Welcome to San Miguel, he said in accented English. I am Brother Francisco. You seek sanctuary. Yes, Eleanor answered before Caleb could. Both of us. The monk's eyes moved between them, seeming to see more than Eleanor expected. Come, we'll see to your horses first. God's creatures deserve care after such a journey. The monastery courtyard was a haven of coolness and green, with a fountain bubbling in the center and fruit trees espalierading ancient walls. Other monks moved about their evening tasks, barely glancing at the newcomers. Eleanor had expected questions, demands for explanation, but there were none. Brother Francisco led them to simple rooms, separate, as was proper, in the guest quarters. "Supper is in an hour," he said. "Sister Catherine will bring water for washing. Tomorrow, if you wish, you may speak with the abbot about extended sanctuary." When he left, Eleanor stood in her small cell, taking in the narrow bed, the wooden cross on the wall, the window that looked out over mountains painted purple by twilight. After weeks of sleeping on hard ground, always listening for danger, the silence felt strange. A knock came at her door. Instead of Sister Catherine, it was Caleb, carrying a basin of water and looking uncomfortable. The sister got called away, something about a difficult birth in the village. He set the basin on the small table. "Thought you might still want to wash." Eleanor touched her tangled hair, aware suddenly of how she must look, sun-damaged, trail-dirty, nothing like the judge's proper wife she'd once been. "I must be a sight. You're beautiful." The words came out rough, honest. Sitting there in the courtyard, the sunset on your face. "Eleanor, I need to say something." She waited, watching emotions chase across his weathered features. "Tomorrow, when you talk to the abbot, ask for sanctuary for yourself alone. Tell him I forced you to come here, that you're afraid of me. They'll protect you, help you reach your sister safely. Caleb, listen to me." He moved closer, urgent now. "I've been thinking all week. Your husband's accusation that I kidnapped you, it could work in your favor. Play that story and you're free. Fight it and you're fugitive forever. You're young. You have family who'll take you in. You can have a real life. What about you? I'll head for Mexico. Always planned to eventually. Lost myself down there where you's law can't follow." Eleanor stood slowly, crossing to where he stood by the window. "And if I don't want that life, if I want—" She stopped, suddenly uncertain. "What do you want, Eleanor?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibilities. Through the window came the sound of monks singing Compline, their voices rising and falling in ancient rhythms. The last light was fading from the sky. "I want to stop running," she said finally. "Not from place to place. I know that may never end, but from myself, from what I feel." She took a breath, gathering courage. "I love you, Caleb Winters." He closed his eyes as if the words pained him. "You can't. Why? Because you're wanted? Because we've known each other barely 2 weeks? Because society says a woman like me shouldn't love a man like you?" She touched his face, forcing him to look at her. "I've spent my whole life following those rules. They brought me nothing but misery. Eleanor, no, let me finish." The words tumbled out. Weeks of holding back finally breaking free. "When I was with my husband, I felt like I was dying inside, piece by piece, day by day. But with you, even running for our lives, even scared and hungry and hurt, I feel alive. I feel like myself. That's worth more than all the safety and respectability in the world." He caught her hands, holding them against his chest where she could feel his heart racing. "If you stay with me, you'll always be looking over your shoulder. No home, no children, no normal life. Is love enough to make up for all that?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I want to find out. Unless you don't feel—" He silenced her with a kiss that was answer enough. When they broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I've loved you since you threw that wedding ring into the desert," he confessed. "Maybe before, but loving you means wanting what's best for you. And I don't know if that's me. Then let me decide what's best for me." She stepped back, chin raised in the stubborn gesture he'd come to know well. "Tomorrow, I'll tell the abbot we're married. Common law, but married all the same. It's not entirely a lie. We've shared more truth between us than most couples do in a lifetime. The monks aren't fools. They'll know. They'll know we're two people seeking sanctuary. Everything else is our business." A bell rang somewhere in the monastery, calling the faithful to prayer. Caleb touched the compass at her throat, the one he'd given her in the cave. "You're sure this is the direction you want to go?" "I've never been more sure of anything." They stood together as darkness settled over San Miguel, and for the first time since fleeing Millbridge, Eleanor felt something like peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, letters to write, stories to navigate, futures to plan. But tonight, in this ancient place of refuge, they were simply two souls who had chosen each other against all odds. The next morning brought Sister Catherine, a shrewd-eyed woman of middle years who took one look at Eleanor and declared she needed feeding up. Over a breakfast of fresh bread and honey, Eleanor carefully told their story, enough truth to satisfy, enough omission to protect. "My husband and I seek sanctuary while we arrange passage west," she said, the lie of marriage coming easier than expected. "We've had some difficulties with the law, misunderstandings." Sister Catherine's expression suggested she'd heard many such stories. "The abbot will want to meet you both, but I can tell you now, San Miguel turns away no one who comes in peace. How long do you need?" "A few weeks, perhaps a month. Long enough to contact my sister in Kansas, receive funds for travel. And your husband? What trade does he follow?" Eleanor glanced at Caleb, who'd been silent throughout the meal. "He trains horses. He's very skilled." Providence smiles. "Brother Miguel has been struggling with a young stallion donated to us, wild as the wind and twice as stubborn." Sister Catherine looked at Caleb directly. "Perhaps you could assist, as payment for sanctuary." "I'd be glad to," Caleb replied. And Eleanor heard the relief in his voice. Honest work, even temporary, would ease his conscience about accepting charity. They met the abbot that afternoon, a thin man with kind eyes who asked few questions and offered simple terms. They could stay as long as needed, provided they helped with daily work and respected the monastery's peace. Eleanor would assist Sister Catherine with her herbs and medicines. Caleb would work with the horses. "We ask only truth between these walls," the abbot said at the end. "Whatever fiction you maintain for the outside world is your concern. But here, be who you are." That night, Eleanor found Caleb in the stable, brushing down a bay mare by lantern light. The wild stallion Sister Catherine had mentioned watched from a corner stall, eyes rolling white. "Sister Catherine gave me something," she said, holding out a small bottle. "For your shoulder." She noticed you favoring it. He'd taken a grazing shot in the ambush with her husband's men, though he'd never complained. Eleanor helped him ease off his shirt, trying not to stare at the collection of scars that marked his copper skin. The newest wound was healing clean, but still tender. As she worked the liniment into his shoulder, she told him about the letter she'd written to her sister. "I told her I was married, that we're heading to California to start fresh. I asked her to send money to the general delivery in Santa Fe. And if she doesn't believe you, if she tells your father, then we go to Mexico as planned." She corked the bottle, but didn't step away. "Either way, we go together." He turned to face her, and in the lamplight she could see the battle in his eyes. Hope against habit, love against the logic of survival. Outside, nightbirds called and the monastery bells marked another hour of safety. "The abbot knows," Caleb said quietly, "about us not being married proper. He didn't say anything, but he knows. Does it matter?" "It might, to you, later." Eleanor considered this, then made a decision. "Stand up." He did, curious. She took his hands in hers, feeling the calluses and scars, the strength and gentleness she'd come to trust. "Caleb Winters," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I take you as my husband, not because the law says so or a preacher blessed it, but because I choose you, today and all the days after." His hands tightened on hers. "Eleanor Whitman, I take you as my wife, to protect and cherish, to run with or stand beside, whatever comes. Then we're married as far as I'm concerned. The rest is just paper. They sealed it with a kiss there in the stable, with horses as witnesses and stars visible through the hay door. It wasn't the wedding either had imagined in younger days, but it was theirs, chosen and claimed. Later, walking back to the guest quarters, Eleanor felt the compass bounce gently against her chest with each step. True north, she thought. Not a direction on a map, but a person to walk beside. Tomorrow she would help Sister Catherine tend the sick, and Caleb would begin gentling the wild stallion. They would work and wait and plan for whatever came next. But tonight, she was simply Eleanor Winters, walking hand in hand with her husband under the shelter of sanctuary walls. The morning they took him was bright with false spring, the kind that tricks you into forgetting winter isn't done. Eleanor was in the herb garden with Sister Catherine, learning to distinguish between comfrey and foxglove, when she heard the horses in the courtyard. Too many horses, moving with military precision. She dropped the basket of cuttings and ran, her skirts tangling in the lavender bushes. But she was too late. In the courtyard, Caleb knelt with his hands bound behind him, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. Judge Halbrook stood over him, immaculate despite the dusty ride, flanked by 4 federal marshals. "Eleanor, my dear." Her husband's voice was soft, solicitous, as if speaking to a spooked horse. "Thank God we've found you. You're safe now." "No." The word came out strangled. She started forward, but one of the marshals blocked her path. "Ma'am, please stay back. This man is dangerous. He's my—" She caught herself, remembering their fiction. To claim him as her husband now would only confirm his guilt in their eyes. "He never hurt me. Never. This is all a mistake." "Of course he didn't hurt you, darling." Halbrook approached slowly, hands outstretched as if to embrace her. She backed away. Stockholm Syndrome, the alienists call it, when a captive begins to sympathize with her captor. "But you're safe now. I'm taking you home. I won't go with you." His face hardened for just a moment before resuming its mask of concern. "You're confused, traumatized. Marshal Bennett. Perhaps you could explain the situation to my wife?" The lead marshal, a grizzled man with kind eyes that made it worse somehow, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Halbrook, we have a federal warrant for this man's arrest. Horse theft, kidnapping, extortion. Your husband has statements from witnesses who saw him force you from your home." "They're lying." Eleanor looked wildly around the courtyard. Brother Francisco stood in a doorway, his face grave. The abbot watched from an upper window. "Please, someone tell them—" "Tell them what?" Halbrook's voice cut like a blade. "That you've been hiding here with your kidnapper. That these good monks have been harboring a federal fugitive." He turned to the abbot's window. "I trust the monastery won't face any difficulties for unknowingly sheltering a criminal." The threat was clear. Eleanor saw Brother Francisco's face pale. San Miguel survived on the tolerance of civil authorities. If Halbrook made trouble for them— "It's all right," Caleb said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken. "Don't fight them." "Eleanor." "No." She broke free from the marshal's restraining hand and dropped to her knees beside him. Up close, she could see the bruising on his jaw, the careful way he held himself. They'd beaten him before bringing him here. "I won't let them take you." He leaned close, speaking low enough that only she could hear. "Remember what I taught you. Stay strong, stay smart, live free." Touching, Halbrook grabbed Eleanor's arm, hauling her to her feet. His fingers dug in hard enough to bruise. "Marshal, I believe my wife has some items in her room. Perhaps someone could collect them while I reacquaint her with her situation." He pulled her aside, into the shadow of the colonnade. When they were out of earshot, his gentlemanly mask finally slipped. "Did you really think you could humiliate me like this? Make me the laughingstock of Millbridge? Poor Judge Halbrook. Can't even keep his young wife from running off with a half-breed horse thief." "I left of my own free will. Caleb had nothing to do with—" His hand cracked across her face, snapping her head back. "You will not speak that savage's name. You are my wife, mine. and you will play the part of the rescued victim, or so help me. I will see him hang for every crime I can fabricate." Eleanor tasted blood where her teeth had cut her cheek. "You're going to do that anyway. Perhaps, or perhaps he merely goes to prison for horse theft. It depends entirely on how well you cooperate." He gripped her chin, forcing her to meet his cold eyes. "Fight me, and I'll see him swing. I'll make you watch. Then I'll have this monastery investigated for harboring fugitives. How many other desperate souls have they sheltered? I wonder, how many violations could an ambitious prosecutor find?" The trap was perfect, and they both knew it. Eleanor's defiance crumbled as she realized the cost of resistance, not just to Caleb, but to the monks who'd shown them kindness. "What do you want me to do?" The words tasted like ashes. "Sign a statement confirming the kidnapping. Testify at his trial if needed. Return home as my devoted, grateful wife." His thumb stroked her cheek in a parody of tenderness. "Do these things, and Mr. Winters lives. Refuse." "I understand." They returned to the courtyard to find Sister Catherine arguing fiercely with the marshals, brandishing a medical text and insisting they had no right to remove a patient under her care. The sight of Eleanor's reddened cheek silenced her mid-sentence. "My wife is ready to leave," Halbrook announced. "Sister, perhaps you could help her gather her things. I'm sure she's eager to put this ordeal behind her." Sister Catherine's eyes were full of understanding and sorrow as she led Eleanor away. In the small cell that had been her sanctuary, Eleanor mechanically packed her few possessions. The riding clothes she'd worn for weeks, the compass Caleb had given her, her mother's shawl. "There are other ways," Sister Catherine said quietly. "The abbot has influence. We could petition—" "No," Eleanor's voice was hollow. "I won't bring trouble to San Miguel. You've done enough. Child, what that man is doing to you is legal. He's my husband in the eyes of the law. Everything else is just what I wished could be true." She returned to the courtyard to find Caleb already loaded in a prison wagon. Their eyes met across the space, and she saw him mouth something. At first she didn't understand. Then she realized he was saying her maiden name, Whitman. "Remember who you were before. Remember who you are." "Say goodbye to your kidnapper," Halbrook said magnanimously. "Closure is important for healing." Eleanor approached the wagon on unsteady legs. The marshals stepped back, giving her space but watching carefully. She looked up at Caleb, memorizing his face, the sun lines around his eyes, the stubborn jaw, the mouth that had smiled so rarely until these last weeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be. You gave me something I never expected to have." His voice was steady, meant to give her strength. "Now give me one more thing. Your word that you'll survive this, that you won't let him break you." "I promise." "Ma'am," Marshal Bennett spoke gently. "It's time." Eleanor was helped into Halbrook's carriage like the lady she'd been raised to be. Through the window, she watched the prison wagon roll away, taking with it the only man who'd ever seen her as herself, not as property to be owned or shaped. Halbrook settled beside her, satisfied as a cat with cream. "You'll thank me someday. When you're sitting in our beautiful home with our children around you, you'll realize I saved you from a life of degradation." Eleanor said nothing. She felt the compass pressing against her chest beneath her dress, hidden but present. True north, Caleb had said. She might be forced to go south with her husband, but her internal compass would always point toward freedom. The carriage rolled through San Miguel's gates, and Eleanor didn't look back, but she heard the bells ringing, and she knew they rang for her and Caleb, not a death knell, but a promise that sanctuary existed, even if she couldn't claim it now. As they descended the mountain, Halbrook talked of the improvements he'd made to the house, the social events she'd missed, the importance of putting this embarrassment behind them. Eleanor let the words wash over her like rain. Meaningless noise. She was thinking of Caleb's hands, gentle on a spooked horse, his rare smile, the way he'd said her name like a prayer, the mock wedding in the stable that had felt more real than anything spoken in a church. "Are you listening to me?" Halbrook's voice sharpened. "Yes, Husband. The lie came easily. She'd learned to lie in these past weeks. To survive. To protect. To maintain the fiction that might keep those she cared about safe. Good, because when we return to Millbridge, you will be the perfect wife. Any hint of scandal, any suggestion that you are anything but a victim, and Mr. Winters will face the consequences. Do you understand? I understand. But as the carriage carried her back to her cage, Eleanor made her own vows. She would play Halbrook's game for now. She would sign his papers and speak his lies. But she would also remember everything Caleb had taught her about survival, about reading the land and finding water and staying strong when everything seemed lost. Because somewhere between the night she'd fled in her wedding dress and this moment of capture, she'd learned the most important lesson of all. Cages could be opened. Locks could be picked. And patient creatures who bided their time often found their chance to run. The compass rose and fell with her breathing, pointing the way to a freedom she would claim again. Someday. Somehow. For Caleb. For herself. For the woman she'd chosen to become in those brief, precious weeks when the world had shrunk to just 2 fugitives and the vast possibility of the horizon. The needle slipped again, pricking Eleanor's finger. She barely noticed the pain anymore. A year of playing the perfect wife had numbed her to small hurts. She set aside the embroidery, another pillowcase for a trousseau that felt like grave clothes, and moved to the window. Millbridge sprawled below, larger now than when she'd fled. The railroad had come through, bringing prosperity and strangers. Good for a woman who no longer wished to be recognized. Staring out windows again, Mrs. Garrett, the new housekeeper, bustled in with tea. Halbrook had dismissed the old servants, anyone who might remember the frightened bride who'd run. The judge won't like that, says it gives you melancholy thoughts. Eleanor turned from the window. And we mustn't have that. She'd learned the rhythm of survival, smile at social functions, agree with her husband's opinions, never mention those weeks of freedom, never speak Caleb's name. In return, Halbrook kept his word. Caleb lived, serving 5 years for horse theft instead of hanging for kidnapping. 5 years, 4 more to go. But this morning had brought news that changed everything. Eleanor pressed a hand to her still flat stomach, where the doctor had confirmed what she'd suspected. A child. Halbrook's child. Conceived in duty rather than love, but innocent of its making. The sound of horses in the courtyard made her return to the window. Not her husband. He was holding court today. A single rider, dusty from hard travel. Something about the set of his shoulders. Eleanor flew down the stairs. Proprieties forgotten. She reached the door as the rider dismounted, and her heart stopped. Not Caleb. Of course not. But Brother Francisco, looking older and travel-worn. "My child," he said simply, "may we speak privately?" She led him to the garden, away from servants' eyes. Her hands shook as she poured water from the pitcher kept cool in the shade. "Is he—" She couldn't finish the question. "Alive. That's why I've come." The monk accepted the water gratefully. There was a fire at the territorial prison, many buildings destroyed. In the confusion, several prisoners escaped. Eleanor sank onto a bench. Caleb? Gone these 3 weeks. They assume he fled to Mexico, but Brother Francisco pulled a small leather pouch from his robes. "This arrived at San Miguel yesterday," with trembling fingers. Eleanor opened the pouch. Inside was a folded paper and a small carved horse, no bigger than her thumb. The detail was exquisite. Flowing mane, proud arch of neck. She unfolded the paper, recognizing the careful script of someone who'd learned letters late. E, the stallion remembers. Same trail. First snow. C. "I don't understand," Brother Francisco said gently. "But I thought you should have it." Eleanor clutched the carving, mind racing. The stallion at San Miguel, the one Caleb had gentled, the trail they'd taken there. First snow, autumn, perhaps 2 months away. He was coming for her. "Thank you," she managed. "Will you stay? Rest?" "I cannot. Your husband has no love for our monastery. Better I'm not found here." He rose, then paused. "Whatever you decide, child," Know that San Miguel remembers you both in our prayers." After he left, Eleanor sat in the garden until shadows grew long. The carved horse was smooth under her fingers, warm from her touch. Caleb was free, waiting. But she was no longer the desperate girl who'd fled into the night. She had position now, safety of a sort, and soon, a child who deserved better than a life on the run. Unless that child deserved better than a father who saw people as possessions. That night, Eleanor played her role perfectly at dinner, listening to Halbrook describe the day's trials, a rustler sentenced to 10 years, a woman granted divorce for abandonment, though why any decent woman would want such shame, he'd sneered. "I have news," Eleanor said when he paused. "I saw Dr. Morrison today." Halbrook's fork stilled. "And? You're to be a father." His face transformed with satisfaction. "Finally, a son to carry on my name." He raised his glass. "You've done well, Eleanor." Like she was a broodmare who'd finally proved her worth. Eleanor smiled and accepted his toast. All while planning, the next 2 months passed in careful preparation. Eleanor played the delighted mother-to-be, accepting congratulations and advice while secretly gathering supplies. Money skimmed from household accounts. Clothing altered for hard travel. Her mother's jewelry, never worn but never sold, sewn into the lining of an old cloak. She studied maps in Halbrook's study while he was at court, memorizing routes and water sources. She built her strength with long walks, claiming the doctor recommended exercise. She watched the mountains for the first sign of snow. It came early that year. October barely turned when white dusted the peaks. Eleanor stood at her window, watching the sunset paint the snow pink and gold. Tonight, it had to be tonight, Halbrook was traveling, a judicial conference in Denver. He'd left that morning, pompous with importance. The servants had been given a rare evening off for Mrs. Garrett's birthday. The house stood empty, quiet as a held breath. Eleanor dressed carefully. Not in flight clothes this time. That would draw attention. Instead, she wore traveling dress suitable for a judge's wife visiting relatives. She pinned her hair properly, donned her best cloak. To any casual observer, she would be above suspicion. She left a letter on Halbrook's desk, not the frantic scrawl of a fleeing girl, but the measured words of a woman who'd found her truth. She told him about the child, told him she'd return if he publicly admitted to lying about the kidnapping, told him that if he came after her, she'd make sure every newspaper from here to San Francisco knew exactly what kind of man Judge Halbrook really was. It was a bluff, mostly. But Halbrook valued his reputation above all else. Perhaps it would buy her time. Eleanor walked out the front door like she had every right to leave. The livery stable was 3 blocks away, and the night boy knew her well. The judge's wife who brought apple treats for the horses. Evening, Mrs. Halbrook. Which mount tonight? The bay mare. Tommy, I received word my cousin in Springer has taken ill. I must leave immediately. The boy saddled the mare without question. Why would he? Mrs. Halbrook was above suspicion. Had been the perfect wife for a full year. Eleanor pressed a gold coin into his palm. Guilt money, escape money, hush money all in one. She rode sedately through town, every muscle screaming to gallop. Only when Millbridge lights faded behind her did she let the mare run. The mountain trail was treacherous in darkness, but Eleanor had ridden it in memory 1,000 times. The compass bumped against her chest, her constant companion through the year of captivity. Dawn found her high in the foothills. The mare lathered despite the cold. Eleanor dismounted at a stream she remembered, letting the horse drink while she studied the trail ahead. If Caleb had received her reply, a simple yes left at San Miguel, he would be waiting at the abandoned mining camp they'd passed before. If he'd changed his mind, if he'd been recaptured, if... Eleanor pushed doubts aside and mounted again. The sun climbed higher, melting the light snow and turning the trail to mud. She was grateful for it. Harder to track. Every sound made her heart race. But no pursuit appeared. The mining camp materialized from the forest like a ghost town. Collapsing cabins, rusted equipment, silence broken only by wind in the pines. Eleanor dismounted, legs shaking from more than exhaustion. "Caleb?" Her voice seemed small in the emptiness. A figure stepped from behind a cabin, and the world stopped. Thinner than before, hair longer, a new scar across his jaw, but his eyes, warm brown, full of wondering joy, were exactly as she remembered. Eleanor. Just her name. But it held everything. She took one step, then another, then was running. He caught her up, spinning her around while she laughed and cried simultaneously. When he set her down, his hands framed her face like she was something precious, something that might vanish. "You came," he whispered. "You asked me to." He kissed her then. And it was coming home. All the proper kisses Halbrook had claimed, all the social niceties she'd endured, fell away like shed skin. This was truth. This was choice. This was freedom. When they finally parted, Caleb's eyes searched hers. "You're sure? It won't be easy. Mexico, maybe South America, always looking over our shoulders." Eleanor took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We'll be looking over our shoulders for 3 now." His face went through a series of expressions: shock, concern, wonder, fierce protectiveness. A baby. Due in spring. Halbrook's by blood, but never by claim. This child will know only one father. She gripped his hands. "If you'll have us both." Instead of answering, Caleb kissed her again. Reverent this time. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I spent a year in a cell dreaming of you, building a life in my mind where we were free, where I could love you proper. Never dreamed I'd get even more." They didn't linger at the camp. Caleb had 2 horses waiting, good ones, bought with money earned breaking mustangs for a rancher who didn't ask questions. They rode through the day and into evening, stopping only when Eleanor swayed with exhaustion. That night, camped under stars in a hidden valley, they made plans. South to the border, then west along the Mexican coast. Caleb had contacts from his army days, honest ranchers who needed horse trainers, places where a man and woman could build something new. "Will you miss it?" Caleb asked as they lay wrapped in blankets, Eleanor's head on his chest. The fine house, the social position. Eleanor thought of her window overlooking Millbridge, the endless embroidery, the weight of being Mrs. Judge Halbrook. "I'll miss nothing. That wasn't living. This," she gestured to the vast night, the wheeling stars, the man beside her. "This is living." They loved each other properly that night. No cave walls or desperation to excuse it. Just 2 people choosing each other under an infinite sky, writing their own laws with touch and whisper and promise. Eleanor woke at dawn to find Caleb saddling the horses. And for a moment panic seized her. Had she dreamed it all? Then he turned, smiled that rare smile that transformed his face, and she knew. This was real. This was her life now. They rode into the rising sun, shadows long behind them. Somewhere, Halbrook would rage and search. But Eleanor had learned patience in her year of captivity, learned to plan and wait and strike when the moment came. She'd left him a choice. His reputation or his revenge. She bet on his vanity. Days blended into each other, south through New Mexico territory, avoiding towns when possible. Eleanor's pregnancy helped their disguise, a couple traveling to family, the wife too delicate for hard riding. Who would suspect a pregnant woman of being a runaway? When they finally crossed into Mexico, Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. Different laws here, different chances. Caleb spoke enough Spanish to get by, and Eleanor learned quickly. In a small coastal town where mountains met sea, they found a cottage for rent, nothing fancy, adobe walls and a tile roof, but it had a garden and a view of endless water, the ocean. Eleanor breathed, seeing it for the first time. Sarah wanted to see the ocean? Now she can, through your eyes. Caleb wrapped his arms around her from behind, hands resting on her growing belly. "We'll tell the little one about her, about everything." They married again there, Properly this time, in a tiny chapel with bougainvillea climbing the walls. Eleanor wore a simple cotton dress and flowers in her hair. Caleb had traded horse training for his single good suit. The priest spoke more Latin than either understood. But it didn't matter. The words were just confirmation of what already was. When their daughter was born, during a spring storm that shook the windows, Eleanor looked into eyes that were purely her own and smiled. No trace of Halbrook in this fierce little soul, who gripped her finger and wailed at the world. "What shall we name her?" Caleb asked, holding them both like spun glass. Eleanor thought of all the names she might have chosen in another life. Society names, family names, proper names. Instead, she looked out at the wild ocean and made her choice. Sarah Freedom Winters. Caleb's voice was rough. Freedom, because that's what she'll always have. The freedom to choose her own path, love who she loves, be who she is. Eleanor touched the compass still worn at her throat. We'll teach her to find her own true north. Years would pass. The story of the judge's runaway wife would fade to legend. Then nothing. Halbrook would remarry. Father-sons to carry his name, never knowing his first child grew wild and free by the sea. Eleanor would teach the village children letters while Caleb trained horses for local ranchers. Sarah would grow up bilingual and fearless, swimming like a seal and riding before she could properly walk. Sometimes Eleanor would wake in the night, disoriented, expecting cold sheets and colder eyes. But then Caleb would pull her close, murmuring Spanish endearments learned just for her. And she'd remember. This was real. This was chosen. This was hers. The woman who'd fled in a wedding dress was gone, replaced by someone stronger, weathered by sun and joy and the simple act of living free. When Sarah asked about the compass her mother always wore, Eleanor would smile. It reminds me that no matter how lost you feel, you can always find your way. You just have to be brave enough to follow where it points. And in their small house by the sea, with horses in the corral and a child who laughed like bells, two outlaws who'd chosen love over law lived out their days in peace. Not the ending anyone would have predicted, but the one they'd written for themselves, word by careful word, choice by dangerous choice. The desert had taught them to survive. Love had taught them to live. And in the end, that made all the difference. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. If you enjoyed Eleanor and Caleb's story, please let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. We'd love to connect with fellow Western romance enthusiasts from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love and adventure on the frontier. What did you think of Eleanor's journey? Share your thoughts below.